Golden Maple Lecture is an opportunity to recognize the contributions that Japanese Canadians have made to the local community. In particular, we remember the many people that came before us. The first, second, and third generations, the Issei, Nisei, and Sansei, who persevered through hardship and helped to make the society that we live in today. We also take this time to consider how Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden can continue to serve the local community. I know that this evening we have all gathered to hear from Tad Mitsui, a citizen who has given so much to the garden and who has touched many of us in this room. I would like to thank our sponsors for generously supporting today's event. They are Japan Foundation Toronto, the Consul General of Japan, Calgary, Southern Alberta Council for Public Affairs, Center for Oral History and Tradition, the Nikkei Memory Capture Project, and the University of Lethbridge. So we have several distinguished guests here tonight, and they're going to offer their greetings. So the Honorable Nathan Newdorf, MLA Lethbridge East, he sends his regrets. He could not be here, but we thank Nathan for his ongoing support of the garden. And I am very pleased now to call on the Honorable Shannon Phillips, MLA Lethbridge West, and we thank Shannon for her support of the garden and her advocacy for all of us at the University of Lethbridge always. So thank you, Shannon.
Arigato, Fujiwara-san, and Fujiwara-sensei, I suppose. Minasan konbanwa. Thank you for inviting me to bring you some quick greetings. I won't belabor the point. I just want to recognize, of course, that we are joined by Watabe-san, who is the Consul General of Japan, and of course Yamamoto-san has joined us from Toronto from the Japan Foundation, and we thank them for their support of our Japanese Canadian community and culture here in Lethbridge. And it's so important that we recognize the full diversity of our community here in Lethbridge, and and across Western Canada too. That history isn't always something that we can necessarily be proud of as Canadians. I know in the summers, I spend my time in the Kootenays, not far from New Denver, and this summer the kids and I camped at Kaslo. And on the side of the Kaslo Hotel are those photos of all of the folks that were interned there. And we spent quite a long time studying those photos of all the little kids in particular. And I wondered just how many ended up here. And probably there's quite a few ancestors on that photo. But what has come from that here in Lethbridge is an incredibly diverse and strong community that enriches the life of both Japanese Canadians and the whole community. And so I want to thank you for your ongoing efforts in that regard. And of course, I am looking forward to hearing from Tad Mitsui this evening. His incredible leadership in this community is always quiet, it is understated, but it's loud in the ways that it needs to be. He is a giant in this community, and that's why we honored him with the Platinum Jubilee Medal earlier this year, and the Queen's Jubilee Medal. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm now pleased to call on His Worship Blaine Higgin, Mayor of Lethbridge. And we thank Blaine for your continued support of the garden, and we enjoy working with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, MLA Phillips, for the words about the history of the Japanese here in our community, because it's really quite exciting. We have a past that maybe sometimes we're not proud of, but I see what has come over the years and the incredible Japanese culture that we're able to have within our community. So thank you very much for speaking to that. We had a group of exchange families that came out here a couple months ago, and we take them by many different things. It's Head Smash and Buffalo Jump, and it's many different locations around our community, and show them what we've got to share. And one of the top ones that they talk about is when they go by Nikka Yuko Japanese Gardens. And Michelle, I can't thank you enough. They reach out and they say that that was a highlight of their trip. And of course, one of the monuments, one of the art pieces that was given is actually just right in front of Japanese Gardens. And so they talked about the dance too, and that they couldn't quite get it down, but they enjoyed the dance and the culture that was shared there. So thank you very much for that. And so on behalf of City Council, thank you everyone for being here. And I'm really looking forward to hear Tad speak, because it is just absolutely amazing. As Ms. Phillips says, he is a great person within our community and has such great knowledge, and really excited to be able to see what he has to share with us. And thank you everyone for being here. I'll forget a name if I start going through, but everybody here, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Higgin. So now I call on Consul General of Japan, Calgary, Takahiko Watabe. We appreciate your enthusiastic support of the garden. He's been in Alberta less than a year, but I've seen him numerous times visiting us here. So thank you for your presence this evening.
Thank you, Fujiwara-sensei. Good evening, honored guests. It is a great honor to join you at tonight's Japan Foundation exhibit launch reception and gold maple presentation. I would like to thank Ms. Shannon Philippe, MLA for Lethbridge West, His Worship Blaine Higgin, Mayor of Lethbridge, Ms. Dawn Sugimoto, President of Lethbridge District Japanese Garden Society, Dr. Digville Jays, University of Lethbridge President. Thank you always to Executive Director Ms. Michelle Day Miles and the hardworking staff at Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden for all of the work leading up to the Golden Maple reception, as well as for hosting the Japan Foundation's exhibit, The Superlative Artistry of Japan. A special thank you to Ian Thom for a wonderful job taking care of these pieces. This exhibit is on display from tonight to October 15th and features 38 different and unique pieces across a wide range of genres from the Meiji era to the present day. I hope all of you here tonight enjoy the experience and share with your friend and family. For tonight's presentation, I'm looking forward to hearing Minister Mitsui's insight on life, hardships, triumphs, and loved ones. It is sure to be a fascinating and heartwarming look at the complexities that make up one person's journey. I would also like to thank Minister Mitsui for supporting Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden as an honorary lifetime membership inductee. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you to Nikka Yuko, the City of Lethbridge and the University of Lethbridge for your kind hospitality. It is my sincere hope that events like these will help to further strengthen the ongoing relationship between Japan and Lethbridge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I'm very pleased now to call on Japan Foundation Executive Director Toronto Noriko Yamamoto. And I actually met Executive Director Yamamoto at the Japan Studies Association of Canada in Toronto last year and this past weekend in Saskatoon. So really glad that you could visit us here at Nikka Yuko and U of L. And yeah, the superlative artistry of Japan is aptly named, and thank you for bringing that to Bunka Center.
Aki Fujiwara Sensei, Honorable Shannon Phillips, and His Worship Brain Hicken, and President Digvir Jayas, and Consul General Takahiko Watabe, and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Konbanwa. My name is Noriko Yamamoto, and I'm the Executive Director of the Japan Foundation, Toronto. I'm so thrilled to be here in Lethbridge for my first time to the University of Lethbridge, as well as the Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden. It is my great pleasure to represent Japan Foundation Toronto at the earlier opening reception at the garden, and as well as attending this maple opening, maple reception, golden maple reception. First, I'd like to express my congratulations and gratitude to our co-organizers and community partners, Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden, the University of Lethbridge, and the Consulate General of Japan in Calgary. And without such a tremendous interest and support, it would not be possible to have this exhibition to be in Lethbridge. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce the Japan Foundation. The Japan Foundation is a semi-governmental organization with a mandate to promote culture exchange between Japan and the world. Established in 1972, we have celebrated the 50th anniversary last year. Our Toronto branch, which is one of 26 overseas offices, was opened in 1990 to further understanding between Japan and Canada. We provide a variety of in-person as well as online programming in Japanese language education, arts and culture, and Japanese studies, and intellectual exchanges. We have the film screening event online, so that please enjoy any of the program we offer through our online. So, talking about the current exhibition, the superlative artistry of Japan, since its world debut in 2017, it has traveled through Europe, North and South America, including a last stop just before here is at our center in Toronto. Now it has arrived here today. The exhibition presents a variety of collection of artisans' works and materials from different genres. Each piece came as a result of highly skilled techniques and craftsmanship. So this is one of the celebration of Japanese craftsmanship, and I hope everyone can enjoy for this exhibition. It is up to October 15, so take the time. In closing, I'd like to express my congratulations and gratitude once again to our co-organizers and sponsors and community partners. I hope this exhibition at this garden will help to enhance a friendship between Lethbridge, Canada, and Japan, and will provide audience joyous encounters in Japanese culture. Thank you very much for having me.
So, batting fifth, Lethbridge and District Japanese Garden Society President Don Sugimoto. Don has provided tremendous leadership for us in the society. Great working with you and all the fantastic directors that are here today. So, Don.
Oki, konbanwa, good evening. Emily Phillips, Consul General Watabe, Mayor Higgin. Our many special guests here tonight, thank you all for being here. Our lifetime honorary members and so many good friends of the garden. It's a privilege to be here representing the Lethbridge and District Japanese Garden Society Board. Many of you have probably heard me talk about being hoodwinked and hogtied into the presidency. I'm just kind of joking about that. But, you know, on nights like tonight, when you get to see the cultural impact of the garden, when you see that beautiful art exhibit, thank you to the Japan Foundation, when we take time to acknowledge the individuals who've given so much of themselves to supporting the garden, and when we applaud our long service employees whose dedication to the garden is truly admirable. It's times like these when I feel lucky to have been hogtied. I'm fortunate to work with my fellow directors whose expertise in history and tourism and parks and culture, they really are a dream team. It's fabulous. Yeah, good job, board. It is seriously such an incredible board. And fortunate to work with Michelle Day Miles, our Energizer Bunny, who's like immersed herself in the culture, and she teaches me about my own culture all the time. Thank you, Michelle. And fortunate to see all of you who, you know, you give us the sense of community that nurtures the garden. And in turn, it nurtures the community. And it's beautiful. It serves the community through sheer beauty and cultural experiences and tourism and economic development. It's incredible. My thanks to all of you for giving me this feeling of being so lucky. To tonight's honorees and special guests, I thank you for sharing the beautiful journey that is the Japanese garden and its message of friendship, resilience, and most of all, community. And I look forward to the presentation. Tad, I think we all want to grow up to be like you. It's probably not too late, right? We could still catch up. Can we? Okay. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing this wonderful evening with us. And arigatou gozaimasu.
So very happy now to call on University of Lethbridge President, Dr. Digvir Jayas. Thank you so much for your presence and your generous support of today's event and for being here with your wife, Manju. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Lethbridge. As mentioned, I'm Digvir Jayas, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Lethbridge. I last week was gifted by the elder Dr. Mike Brucehead, the Blackfoot name, which is Ikai Niba, meaning fast buffalo. So I'm very honored to have given that name and welcomed in the Blackfoot community. It is my pleasure to be here and bring greetings on behalf of the University of Lethbridge. Thank you everyone for joining us here tonight, but I especially want to welcome MLA Ms. Phillip, Mayor His Worship Higgin, Consul General Watabe, and then the Japan Foundation Executive Director Ms. Yamamoto. I'm also pleased to welcome two of our senators are here today, Teresa Petrev and Valerie Boras. So welcome to the special host. I am new to my role in the city of Lethbridge, but I understand Nikka Yuko and University of Lethbridge have a long shared history. Both were founded in the same year, 1967. But more importantly, the two organizations share many of the same values, particularly when it comes to the importance of community and culture. We both exist to educate and celebrate, respecting history while shaping the future. And while both organizations have seen substantial growth and significant change since opening their doors, I'm happy to note these foundational values remain constant. At the university, we have a long-standing student and faculty exchange programs, as well as research agreement with 9 universities in Japan. In fact, our oldest international partner is the Japan's Hokai Gakuin University in Sapporo. Since establishing the partnership in 1981, more than 70 University of Lethbridge faculty members have been to SGU as visiting exchange professors, and 60 SGU faculty members have visited University of Lethbridge. We have also welcomed more than 300 SGU students to study on our campus, and almost 220 of our own students have attended SGU. These connections provide important opportunity for our university community and positively impact our campus culture. We are incredibly proud of our ties to the nation of Japan and grateful for our ongoing relationship with the Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden. We look forward to working alongside all of you as we continue to enhance cultural opportunities for Southern Albertans, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight's keynote presentation given by Dr. Tad Mitsui. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of the evening.
So finally, I'd like to introduce my colleague who will introduce the feature speaker. Dr. Carly Adams is a professor of kinesiology and physical education at the U of L. She is a Board of Governors Research Chair Tier 1 and co-director of the Center for Oral History and Tradition. Dr. Adams and Dr. Darren J. Aoki of University of Plymouth have been co-leading the Nikkei Memory Capture project, carrying out important research on Japanese Canadians of Southern Alberta. And recently they have recorded and returned these audio journeys to the community so that we can all listen and learn from them, even while looking at the time map that's displayed at the Bunka Center. So for their innovative time map, audio journeys, and memory booth, the Nikkei Memory Capture Project, in collaboration with Nikka Yuko, has been shortlisted as a finalist for the Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Community Programming. So congratulations. So Carly.
Thank you, Gideon. I am really delighted to be here tonight to bring greetings on behalf of the Center for Oral History and Tradition and the Nikkei Memory Capture Project. Thank you to Michelle Day and her team for making this night happen year after year. It really is lovely to have this celebration together. Through our work with the Garden over the past 6 years, we've formed a really special relationship, and I am just absolutely delighted that we are joining an incredible short list of projects being shortlisted for the Governor General's History Award for Community Programming to celebrate our collaboration. These are some of the pictures of the exhibition at the Garden up here on the screen. If you've not had a chance to see it, please do go to the Garden, go back to the Garden to learn, listen, and share. You can also take out your phone right now if you'd like and scan this QR code there that's up on the screen, and it will take you directly to the audio journey. And the audio journey consists of over 100 entries ranging from 2 minutes to 10 minutes in length, narrated with the beautiful voice of Dr. Darren Aoki. And they're about a variety of topics, sharing Japanese Canadian stories and experiences from Southern Alberta. My comments tonight are going to be a little bit longer than others because I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, Tad Mitsui, Minister Emeritus of the Southminster United Church in Lethbridge. Tad is a very familiar person to many of us. His quiet, gentle, yet passionate and captivating demeanor is something that really lingers with you when you've spent a few minutes in his presence. Tad is an incredibly engaged member of our Lethbridge community. Perhaps you've read one of his provocative letters to the editor, published in the Lethbridge Herald. You may also have saw the news earlier this year when Tad received the Queen Elizabeth Golden Jubilee Medal for, in Shannon Phillips's words, being a good kind of troublemaker. I think many of us chuckled when we heard Shannon say this because it's such an apt description of Tad. For 17 years, Tad has been a devoted volunteer at the Nikka Yuko Garden. He was an invaluable member of the board of directors for many years, offering his expertise and counsel in many areas. He's also volunteered countless hours educating children and families, sharing Japanese stories and folk stories through the popular Tad and Tomo storytime sessions at the garden. Tad is also a very familiar face here on campus, attending many events over the years and social gatherings with his partner of 40 years, Dr. Muriel Mello, a retired professor in the Department of Sociology. Tad and Muriel are also interviewees with the Nikkei Memory Capture Project. They were part of a series of interviews that Elaine Toth did on intimacy and interracial relationships. And they're currently working with Elaine on a new digital storytelling film that will be available for viewing in the memory booth at the garden in 2024. Tad has lived a fascinating and meaningful life. He was born on February 25th, 1932 in Namazu, Japan. He received his Bachelor of Art and Bachelor of Divinity from Tokyo Union Theological Seminary in 1956. In 1957, he immigrated to Canada, and he was ordained into the United Church of Canada in 1958. He was a minister with the Vancouver Japanese United Church from 1958 until 1968. During this time, he also earned a Master of Sacred Theology from Union College, affiliated with the University of British Columbia. And then he went on to complete a doctorate of sacred theology at the United Theological College, affiliated with McGill University. From 1968 to 1975, he was a lecturer and then the Dean of Student Affairs at the University of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. And then throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, he did administrative and advocacy work with NGOs and different organizations to facilitate international projects related to human rights, refugees, liberation movements, food security, and development. To name a few other examples of work that he has done, from 1975 to 1979, he was the Associate Secretary for Africa, International Headquarters of the World University Service in Geneva, Switzerland, where he worked to fundraise and coordinate the anti-apartheid solidarity work of the National World University Service Committees in Canada and Europe. From 1988 to 1990, he worked as the Associate Secretary for Africa and Middle East at the Canadian Council of Churches in Toronto, where he worked to coordinate the church's work among the Palestinian refugees in Israel and other countries in the Middle East. In 1992, he received an honorary doctorate from McGill University in recognition of his contributions to society, to the church, nationally and internationally, in areas such as human rights, justice, and development. Wow, I can't wait to hear you speak tonight. Thank you, Tad, for being here tonight, for sharing your stories and your life experiences.
And Tad tells us that he plans to speak for about 45 minutes, then take some questions from the audience. And I just want to say also that Shaw is here. So today's lecture can be viewed later on Shaw Spotlight and on the Nikka Yuko YouTube channel, because Morton Molyneux is recording this important talk. So thank you.
That means I cannot swear. While I'm getting my paper out, I have to thank, in the beginning, which is not in the script, my life partner, Dr. Muriel Mello, who did the editing of this script. If you don't understand it, I depart from the script. Thank you for the honor given to me to speak at the Golden Maple reception to celebrate those of Japanese ancestry and their contribution to Canada and Southern Alberta. I can speak to this as a Canadian who was born in Japan, but the lessons I bring come from more than my Japanese heritage. I have never felt it was my job to showcase specifically Japanese attributes. Whatever Japanese characteristics I might have shown in my life, they were not intentionally displayed as such. I will tell you how I became who I am, where I have lived and worked. In telling my story, I am also telling the stories of people who crossed the path with me. Those are the people who influenced my philosophy of life. They are the wild birds. I'm warning you, if you live as long as I have, become like me, incapable of shifting papers. They are the ones who gave me a role model, who across the boundaries, whether physical or metaphorical. Allow me to reverse the usual order of this kind of talk. I'll give you my conclusion first, so you can go to sleep if I bore you. I have a distaste for pigeonholing people into stereotypes. I hate it when people assume that I attend a Buddhist temple or Japanese United Church because I happen to look like Japanese. And people assume that I live on sushi. I like cooking, but the dishes I love to prepare are ratatouille and salad niçoise. Another example is David Suzuki is a biologist. The fact that he happened to be Japanese Canadian has nothing to do with his scientific observation. When we pigeonhole people, we clip their wings and limit them within rigid boundaries. And we limit ourselves because we are less open to learning from them in other areas. It is important for you to acknowledge that there is a lingering prejudice in many places which assume that non-Europeans still live in ethnic ghettos. I've experienced this myself, living in all of different places in the world. Once I attended a meeting of international aid organizations to study the specifics of African problems. One aid worker from Europe, I will not name the country, he came to me and said, and I quote, "Isn't there more important things for you to do in Asia?" It took me a little while to realize what he was implying. All of my experiences made me who I am, Tad Mitsui, Canadian who lived and worked in Africa, Europe, Middle East, and across Canada, including Alberta. Being born in Japan is only one part of the story. I spent my formative years in Japan, in Tokyo, before and during and after the Second World War. Notably, I grew up in a Christian home. The Christians in Japan are a tiny minority, less than 1% of the population. No wonder my grandma and great-grandma were kicked out of the family, including my dad. They were disowned for becoming a Christian. So I was an odd bird in Japan, belonging to less than 1% of the population. I was educated to be a Christian minister, like my father. My father was the greatest influence in my early years. Isamu Mitsui was a minister of Methodist Church in Tokyo, in Ginza. If you know Ginza, it's a wonderful place. His Buddhist family disowned him when he quit medical school and joined Christian seminary. At the same time, it was the years when Japanese government was taken over by the military. The military assumed absolute power, making the emperor, Hirohito, the puppet head of the state. The doctrine of divinity of the emperor was a device used to claim the absolute power, and they claimed that they spoke on behalf of the emperor while they told the emperor to shut up. But others were co-opted. Many religious people thought this move by the military was not quite right. Especially the Christians were targeted and treated especially badly. Christians were viewed as agents of foreign power because Christianity was not Japanese religion. Most Christians, of course, loved their country. Most Christians loved the emperor. And they were convinced that it was not against their Christian religion. Later, I read in my father's diary that while Japan was fighting Americans, he prayed for the safety of his old American friends, and particularly his old American professors. He looked forward to the end of the war. This nightmare will be over soon, and reunite to work for the benefit of the whole humanity. Pardon me. When the tide of war turned against Japan in 1944, starting in a Guadalcanal battle, the police, special police, paid more attention to anybody making public speeches, teachers, religious leaders, other community leaders. In this period, my father often didn't come home. He never said anything about those evenings when he didn't show up. I thought he was just busy and slept in the church office. Later, after the war, I found that he was detained and interrogated by the special police for a statement he made in the sermon. A former police officer who interrogated my dad came to the church after the war and converted into Christianity. And he apologized to my dad, saying, the question we kept asking you was, do you believe that Emperor Hirohito was a god? My father always said, I love him. He's a head of a state. I respect him, but he's not a god. Between the end of World War II and the start of the Korean War in 1950, the life of ordinary people in Japan was that of hunger, scarcity, and humiliation. The streets were full of homeless people, orphans who lost their parents during the war, air raid. They lived in shacks and underground bunkers. They were always hungry. Whole population was suffering from hunger. I believe this was the same in Europe after the Second World War. In theory, food was supposed to be available through a government distribution system with the use of coupons. But in reality, system was broken. Homeless, honest people who believe in the system waited for the distribution of food, and they starved. If they didn't want to turn to the black market, only way was to starve. After the war, my family lived in a burnt out concrete shell of the church. What remained after it had been hit by 500 pounds bomb in 1945 in May. I often, during those days, dreamt of simply a bowl of rice and change of clothes. I washed the clothes every night to wear it next day. I remember one supper. It was boiled potato peels. My mother picked up in the kitchen of the US Army barracks. I was always cold in my tattered clothes and handmade footwear. I felt ashamed realizing that I didn't look much like from the orphans who roam around the streets. Poverty and starvation were humiliating. We just hated the disdainful eyes of young American soldiers looking at us like we look at people in downtown Lethbridge. All of us were in search of inner strength to keep us going. Our sense of dignity within ourselves was the only thing that kept our respect, self-respect. Our awareness of our own dignity was the key to that inner strength. If you want to destroy a person, destroy the person's self-respect. Towards the end of those hard times, my father was kept busy dealing with broken people. When I was going to school every morning, without exception, I saw a body or two on the streets. There was no public health care system available. My dad came home one winter night carrying a man dying of pneumonia. His clothes were full of lice and smelling urine. He was homeless, ex-soldier. He lost his family. He could not find family. He stayed with us for a few months until he recovered. The war in Korea that began in 1950 revived the Japanese economy at a spectacular speed. United States needed a secure military base and factory to supply necessities of war. So investment poured into Japan, reviving all the factories. Food food and clothes suddenly appeared in the market. When this transformation began, my father died of exhaustion. It was humiliating and dignity of poverty, along with struggle to keep the family fed during those days, did him in. He was 50 years old. People who remembered my father still talk of him as though he was a saint. I'm embarrassed to hear that, because he was an extraordinary man, extraordinary role model, but perhaps saints are those also pigeonholing people in their own way. So what lesson do I take from this period? I would say it's recognizing that one inner strength to endure is tied to the maintaining dignity and sense of self-worth. My father was known for his compassion, for affirming the dignity of others, even those who had fallen on the hard times. We were all living on the margin of post-war Japan. In Lethbridge today, how do our actions diminish the self-worth of those who are homeless? How do we show compassion to those trapped in addictive habits in order to survive? Are you still awake? I was recruited by the United Church of Canada to help restart Japanese-speaking congregation in Vancouver and lower mainland of British Columbia. My first wife and I landed in Canada in September 1957. I had just graduated from Tokyo Union Theological Seminary. I needed a job to feed ourselves and my mother and 3 sisters. And a Canadian job, even though minister's salary is not all that great, gave us some spare money to send to Japan, because Canadian dollar was pretty good at the time compared to Japanese yen. In Canada, there was a shortage of ministers of Japanese congregation due to wartime and post-war relocation program of Canadian government. I will assume that all of you know a bit about wartime internment of Japanese Canadians, the confiscation and the theft of their property by the government and sold to the benefit of real estate merchants without consent. When internment camps closed at the end of the war, internees were told that they either had to relocate east of the Rockies or choose repatriation to Japan. They were prohibited from returning to the BC coast until 1949. Remember, war ended in 1945? My experience with the community began as people returned to BC, a gradual process of 10 years, because they had to save money to buy land and business. My congregation contained 3 groups of returnees. The first were Nisei, Issei. They were first-generation immigrants from Japan. But 70% of them were naturalized Canadians. They were Canadians. The second were Nisei. They were children of the Issei, all born in Canada. When those 2 groups returned to West Coast, they had to use meager saving to buy new property to reestablish themselves. Fishers had to buy new boats as those who left behind were sold without their consent. Others started small business like corner stores, gas stations, and did manual labor in the sawmill camps, even though they were university graduates, or cutting grass for the middle-class white families. Very few were employed by established Canadian companies because of lingering racial prejudice. Third group, the Kika Nisei, were also part of my congregation. Kika meaning returning to Canada, Nisei, Canadian-born Japanese Canadians. This group had been deported by the Canadian government to Japan starting in mid-1946. Remember, war ended in 1945? This was after the war ended. They were still deported. Secondly, they were Canadians. This group was mostly made up of those who did not want to relocate east of BC. Neither had they money to move to eastern Canada. Canadian government invited them to relocate to Japan because they said, we'll pay your cost. So their passage was paid for by Canadian government, and 4,000 of them were deported to Japan. Issei and Nisei left Canada under the pressure of a still lingering anti-Japanese popular opinion in British Columbia. The deportees suffered unspeakable hardship in Japan. Japan, remember, was just defeated. They were starving. Those deportees were technically foreign nationals. Imagine those starving native Japanese thought they were intruders, giving more burden to their already difficult life. Only in the 1950s did Ottawa government realize the absurdity of these measures and allow these deportees to come back to Canada. Canadians coming back to Canada who were forcefully deported to Japan. Who paid the cost to return to Canada? These Kika Nisei had to pay their way to come back to their own country. Those were called Kika Nisei, who returned rather than their aging Issei parents. They were fed up with Canada, so they stayed in Japan. The Kika Nisei were burdened with the same challenge as new immigrants. But remember, they were trying to reestablish themselves in their own country. They had little English because they had to go to school in Japan. No English was taught. With no money, no property, and often few marketable skills, it was very difficult to restart their life in Canada. I was surprised that those three groups did not voice bitterness when I met them, or they are not vengeful. Instead, I often heard them saying, "Why did we do wrong to be treated like this?" Or, "Maybe we shouldn't have lived so close to each other like in the ghetto Some did try to get government compensation for the property in the boats which were sold without their consent. All these court cases were mostly unsuccessful. Imagine little money they paid for the legal cost and the government money defending their action. All of them were lost in the court. There is an expression in Japanese, shikata ga nai, said often by those who run into unexpected difficulty. Shikata ga nai means you can't do anything about it. Let go and carry on. Was their reaction an internalization of the process of victimizing the victims often happen to the abused women? They feel guilty. Japanese Canadians often voice their guilt. Did they pigeonhole themselves by this attitude? The two groups of Nisei gave birth to an integrated third generation of young Canadians. They're called Sansei. And most of my Sunday school was full of these Sansei. They were my joy. They were true Canadians, went to school in Canada. They're fluent in English. They were Canadians. So I decided to take them to Expo 67. I told them to save their money. And we took a train from Vancouver train station to Montreal. It was a joy to see them. We all sang, "This land is my land. Canada, notre pays." They saw the vastness of Canadian prairies from the train. I was happy to see them, feeling proud of being Canadians. What an irony, given the past experience of their parents and grandparents. And they are called Sanseis, and there are some Sanseis sitting here. Sansei generation, along with some prominent Nisei, spearheaded what we call Japanese redress movement of 1980s. Some Niseis, prominent Niseis, and a lot of Sanseis demanded the Canadian government acknowledge the human rights violations that was imposed on them by Canadian government to the Canadians of Japanese origin during the war. When the children of Niseis and Kiga Nisei became adults, they no longer accepted their parents' attitude of shikata ga nai. That's wrong. We have to tell them to apologize. They were brought up in a truly Canadian way, so they felt it was their right to demand apology. Some of the leaders of this movement, I'm sure you know some of them. David Suzuki, you know him? Joey Kogawa, or Art Miki. They were older Niseis, and majority of them are Sanseis. Until 1988, Canadian government refused to apologize, recognize the mistake they made. So we kept on. Japanese Canadians were discriminated against, humiliated, and mistreated. But important point is not destroyed. they kept their pride in their identity. Perhaps this pride and resilience came from their Japanese heritage. Though Japan was defeated in the war, it never lost its independence and was never colonized and was always proud of their heritage. In Japan's history, Japan picked and chose from foreign culture. If you go to Tokyo, you never see a typical, you will see a typical Western city. We learn from Western culture, religion, like my family, technology, but on their own terms. They picked and chose what they liked and did not pick what they did not like. That's how they kept their dignity. The initiative remained in Japanese hands. That attitude stayed with Canadians of Japanese descent as they built and rebuilt lives in Canada. I am impressed by the resilience and tenacity of Japanese Canadians in their pursuit of justice during this period. But I wonder how far Canada has come in acknowledging the systemic racism that has tainted our history. Our history has always been tainted by racism. We are again being called to be aware of this as we work together in reconciliation with Indigenous people. I think it's about time. My voice is fading, so my partner will take over and read the script I wrote.
Just pretend I'm Tad. I'm going to stand up. I'm a retired prof. And is this picking up now? Everything? Camera person? Yes? All good? Okay. So, and I have to click at the same time. That'll be, yeah, that'll be fine, I hope. After 10 years in Vancouver, it was time for a change. The 1960s were the time that African nations began to throw off the yoke of colonialism and become independent. It coincided with the civil rights movement in the US. Tad was inspired by a speaker from a student volunteer program called Operation Crosswords International. Operation Crosswords Africa. Tad was in graduate program at UBC at that point, and so he took a summer off from his studies and joined the Crosswords program in Eastern Nigeria. He led a group of 10 American students and worked with a women's group to build a community center in a village called Abakaliki. And he ended up hooked on Africa. And I can't tell you how true that is after 40 years with him. I know how true that was. I finally got to experience a bit of Africa myself, but yes, I understand it. People there celebrated their joy in life through laughter, music, and dance. Functionality, or productivity, didn't define one's value as much as one's humanity did. I contacted the Overseas Mission Board of the United Church to check out options in Africa. And Tad did. Tad was offered a job in Lesotho in southern Africa, working for the French Protestant Missionary Society. This organization had asked the United Church of Canada to recruit someone with a graduate degree in theology for the Lesotho post. Lesotho was an independent country, but it was surrounded by South Africa, which was at that point at the height of its discriminatory racial policy called apartheid. Tad never regretted though that he went to Lesotho. That experience redefined his identity. Tad and his first wife and his daughter at that point spent 6 months in Paris for an orientation, and then another 6 months in a small village in the countryside to learn the local language. Finally, they settled in the town of Roma, in the staff house of the University of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland. Tad was to instruct student teachers in how to teach the Bible, as religion was a part of the public school system. It was there that he worked with Desmond Tutu, a newly appointed professor of the Hebrew Bible. And I'll just say to all the faculty here, if you think you're intimidated by somebody else in your department, you can imagine. Tad's time in Africa coincided with the liberation struggles of Black people in the US and the poor working class in Latin America. Out of these struggles came liberation theology, spearheaded by Tutu along with others in Latin America and the US. The foundation of their message was drawn from the story of Israel's exodus from Egyptian slavery. They focused on liberation as the primary message of the Judeo-Christian Islamic spiritual tradition and its practical implications for social change in the here and the now. So Tad's initiation to political engagement was via this biblical lens. Desmond Tutu also showed him how humor and storytelling could be used to deliver tough social commentary. There we go. Oop. I think I skipped some. Okay, we'll figure it out. Tad was equally inspired by students at the university, particularly those who came to Lesotho from South Africa and Zimbabwe, which was then called Rhodesia, to avoid racially separated education. Many children of imprisoned Black South African leaders came to Lesotho, and they became active in the University Christian movement, also known as UCM. This group was founded by students who refused to join the racially segregated Student Christian Movement, or SCM. Tad became a regional director of the UCM for Lesotho and the Orange Free State in South Africa in 1969. UCM acted in defiance of the law, meeting as a racially mixed group in monasteries and in other church properties. These religious spaces were seen to be beyond the reach of the race restriction, even when they were meeting within South Africa. When Black political meetings were illegal, religious organizations provided significant loopholes. However, Tad later found out that at those meetings were heavily infiltrated by police informers. He once drove a van carrying 11 students to attend a retreat in Malawi for Christian activists from Southern African universities. Of the 11 passengers, 3 turned out to be police informers. In the early 1970s, the ecumenical organization, the World Council of Churches, decided to support the South African liberation movement. This spurred the apartheid regime to clamp down hard on resistance movements like UCM. And consequently, in 1971, Tad was arrested in the Johannesburg airport. He spent 3 days in solitary confinement with no explanation. Finally, he was given just 2 hours to get out of the country and told not to come back. And it was, Tad, we figured this out, it was about 225 kilometers from Johannesburg to the border of Lesotho. So, you know, you could get there, but you had to put the pedal to the metal, and there were some things he had to do in terms of getting a car before he got out, could get on the road. So he became a prohibited person under the Communism Suppression Act, unable to leave Lesotho as there was no way to do so without re-entering South Africa. When he was safely back in Lesotho, he assumed he'd be protected by his Canadian passport. But later, when he wrote to the Canadian High Commission in Cape Town to find out why he had been deported, he had been banned, he discovered that his safety as a Canadian was not so secure. The Canadian official responded in a letter beginning with the following sentence, and we quote, "As a Canadian of non-European origin, you are expected to obey the law of the country in which you are a guest." In other words, that official assumed that Tad had done something wrong. He didn't bother to find out exactly what Tad had done. So the racism in South Africa stained the actions of those Canadian officials as well. 10 years later, though, Tad received a letter of apology from Canada's, we would call him now the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mitchell Sharp. Unbeknownst to Tad, people in the United Church had insisted that the Canadian government apologize for the statement made by that foreign officer. That period was the start of sanctions against foreign activists in South Africa. Among Tad's friends, 3 Anglican priests involved in the UCM were also made prohibited immigrants. Anthony Gann from Britain, Michael Lapsley and John Osmers from New Zealand were among them. Lapsley and Osmers were nearly killed a few years later by letter bombs sent to them by the South African regime. And Tad, when we were preparing this talk, Tad said, "You know, that could have been me. Could have been me." It didn't matter that whether or not you were in South Africa, right? You were still at risk. The prosecution of activist students escalated with the 1977 protest of middle school children in Soweto. And now I can move ahead. There we go. This is an extraordinary story. 1977, there's a change in the educational system, and basically they are going to change public education from English, which Black children in South Africa knew, to Afrikaans, a form of Dutch, like that. And you're still expected to succeed. So it was an amazing moment in time. 1977, these middle school children in Soweto, South Africa, a suburb of Johannesburg, aged 12 to 17, marched to protest educational changes. Because these changes would disadvantage them even further. To stop that protest, police killed 176 children, and wounded 1,000 more. So the first image up there is one of the first children killed, Hector Peterson. I've said that right, yes? And it's an extraordinary story. So Hector Peterson has been, hence, today is memorialized in many ways, but that's a very famous image. But he was 14. So whenever I hear the story, I get really shivers up my spine, both because of the horror of it, but also as a former university instructor thinking these were children, students younger than those that are in these hallways, actively taking a stand to change the world. And it did. It really did have a big impact. But the regime blamed university-age activists for instigating such protests and started to pick them off one by one. Among those whom Tad knew through UCM, 11 were killed in various ways. And Tad, you're going to have to help me with the names. Petla Mohapi was found hung in his cell. Steve Biko, very well-known name, was beaten to death.
Abraham Tiro was killed by a letter bomb in Botswana in his exile. Rick Turner, Griffith, one of the Zulu, Griffith Mnge, and others were shot to death on the street. Many went into exile. Many came to Canada too.
So that's a picture of Biko. Despite these dangers, those who persevered became leaders in post-apartheid South Africa. Tad was privileged to know some of them, such as Njabula Ndebele, who I've met, and he's an incredible man. He's sort of like John Ralston Saul of South Africa now. Barney Pityana, and Mampela Rampale. Those three alone, those three last names that I named, have founded new political parties since apartheid ended, led universities, headed prominent human rights groups, and even directed international organizations such as the World Bank. So Mampela Rampale, the female at the top corner, was a director of the World Bank. In 1975, Tad moved for the sake of his daughter's education, and he took a job at the headquarters of World University Service in Geneva, Switzerland. It allowed him to continue supporting South Africa liberation by fundraising in Europe, as well as by traveling more widely in Africa for other projects. He lived in Switzerland then until 1979, and during this period, Steve Biko was murdered. His death led to a significant shift in the opinion of Western countries. Economic sanctions against South Africa were imposed by the United Nations, and at last, that apartheid regime began to crumble. So in that period, Tad had seen how African liberation theology took on a practical form in his friends' and students' bravery and dedication to their cause. He had to rethink the conceptual boundary between religion and political action. He learned that national boundaries and citizenship were no guarantees of protection. His friends faced great danger from following their convictions, some being harassed or killed even while in exile. Nevertheless, they challenged the authorities who pigeonholed them as lesser human beings. Their stand shaped Tad's own consciousness as a human being who might speak against injustice. So, on to Toronto and Geneva. After 14 years overseas, Tad decided to return to Canada. It was his home, his family's home. The Canadian Council of Churches in Toronto offered him a position. And this job allowed Tad to continue pursuing his passion for Africa. And he could also visit Geneva regularly as the Canadian Council worked closely with the World Council of Churches on various projects. His work included coordinating the church's joint advocacy work with Canada's Foreign Affairs Department, which was an important task and took on the important task of expressing concerns about human rights violations in countries where Canadian churches had working relationships. There you go. He also coordinated joint applications by churches for matching government grants, and these grants helped fund joint ecumenical programs for African refugees and for development programs in areas like Ethiopia, the Sahel, and the Sudan. And actually, the jacket that Tad's wearing tonight is from Ethiopia, from back in those years. Hand-woven by monks. Anyways, so you can come up and take a closer look at some point. However, the most demanding part of Tad's job at that point of his work was coordinating assistance for the Middle East Council of Churches. program to help Palestinians in the Holy Land, in that part of the world. That experience opened his eyes to concerns in a different part of the world. So up to that point, he'd been focused a lot on Africa. This was a leap into a new part of the world geography. Extreme sensitivity was needed in terms of the church's working relationship with Islamic and Jewish faith communities. Like Japanese Canadians, Palestinians had been uprooted from their homes, but with longer-term consequences. But how to balance the human rights of Palestinians while still acknowledging the persecution of Jews and the genocide that they had suffered. Again, Tad learned the dangers of pigeonholing. Not all Palestinians are Muslims. Historically, 20% have been Christians. And not all Israelis are against the Palestinian people. Many are peace activists who earnestly want to find a way to cohabit in peace. When a serious famine hit hard in Africa in the mid-1980s, he was seconded to return to the World Council of Churches in Geneva for 2 years to coordinate emergency relief from churches around the world. That meant he could travel. He traveled to 10 drought-stricken countries in Africa. And that travel reminded Tad of people's need to maintain dignity, even in the most dire of situations. But the drought wasn't the only problem. People starved because they were poor and were shut out by multinationals from control of the most fertile land. Unbelievably, Europe continued to import beef and coffee from Ethiopia, even during the worst of the famine. That's always a story I go, really? It's mind-boggling. Tad left the Canadian Council in 1991, but had another chance to work on Palestinian concerns in 2003. Israeli peace activists, together with Palestinian community leaders, asked the World Council of Churches to create a human rights watch group for the region. They hoped that the presence of neutral outsiders would help calm an increasingly tense situation in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. And so Tad was asked to join that group. He spent 3 months living in a village of 3,000 farmers called Jeus, near Jenin on the border between Israel and Palestine. His team was 3 retired clergy from Canada, Norway, and the United States. They tried to ensure that farmers could get to their fields on a daily basis. The Israelis had built a massive defense wall to sequester certain parts of land, areas of land. But that wall often divided Palestinian villages from their fields and their olive groves. So Tad and his group monitored farmers' safe passage through a gate in the wall that was controlled by Israeli soldiers. One time, tensions built up between Jewish peace activists who were working with them and Israeli soldiers. Tear gas canisters began flying, and Tad admits that he ran away. So, then what? After decades of crossing international boundaries for Tad's work, you might think that Tad's world had shrunk in the last 30 years. Since 1991, his jobs focused on Canada. In the early 1990s, he worked in the United Church Administration in Eastern Ontario and Quebec, and then as a part-time minister in a rural church south of Montreal. He fully retired in 2000 when he moved to Lethbridge, but still, those moves, even within Canada, meant exploring new territories closer to home. Moving to Quebec meant discovering a different culture within the same community, or within the same country. And both Tad and I might say that the same thing about the move to Alberta in 2000. Greater self-determination within the Canadian Federation is an ideal in both provinces. We lived in Montreal in 1995 during the second referendum for independence. Tad worked primarily with English-speaking Quebecers, and he could see the increasing uneasiness amongst them as they faced a resurgence of the desire for independence among Francophone neighbors. The vote against separation was received a 50.58 majority. With a margin that narrow, it was really difficult to feel that one side had clearly won. How does one reconcile as a community after such a close decision? In 1995, Tad partially retired, accepting a half-time position to look after a congregation in Howick, Quebec. Parish work was a gift that he had not expected. So after all of these international travels and things like that, it was a very different sort of shift, but a very fulfilling one. It was in a small town of 500 people. Church members were mainly dairy farmers of Scottish background, though the region was a mix of French and English. It was an oasis of sanity, although there were a few bridges to rebuild even in that community after the referendum. He found the church alive and well, not as an organized institution, but in the community of a community of people who actively care for each other. And that community solidarity was an essential when the massive ice storm hit that part of Quebec and in Eastern Ontario for several weeks in 1998. It shut everything down. We had to leave our house for a week because we had no power or heat. We were taken in by farmers who had wood stoves and generators. When our power was restored, because we were in town and so they got the towns back online soon, a little bit sooner, we then took in another family who was still off the grid. Community can be tested in difficult times like these, but it also provides the wings that allow us to survive them. That was evident in rural Quebec, just as it had been in Tad's early life in Japan. Such community cooperation likely will also be an essential resource for all of us as we navigate climate change. In 2000, Tad and I moved to Lethbridge as I'd accepted a teaching position at the university. But what could Tad find to fill his time besides being a good husband, for which I have always been deeply grateful, on the record. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, well, that's fine. The visual arts community became a new territory to explore. Events at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery and the university expanded Tad's conceptual horizons. And he's grateful to a local drawing group who allowed him to develop a new talent in his late 60s and 70s. We could all be so lucky, right, to take on this new talent and this new exploration at that point in our lives. Tad's continued to engage in discussions of justice and human rights through the Southern Alberta Council of Public Affairs and through a long-standing book club. I'm looking at people here, I can point at people. Long-standing book club at Southminster United, which is Tad's spiritual home. And somehow, there should be another slide here. Oh well, that's okay. You know what Southminster looks like. Both of those groups here in Lethbridge contain plenty of wild birds, those who soar to view the world from a different perspective. They inspire Tad. And then there are Tad's letters to the editor. I did notice we did hear the chuckle when that was mentioned earlier by Carly. When Tad retired to Lethbridge, he'd hoped to start writing a book, asking for advice from a friend who was managing editor of a national magazine. He nixed the idea of the book. Write letters to the editor, he said. A book by an unknown writer can take years to sell at first print of maybe 1,000 copies. But even a local newspaper of a small community has at least 10,000 readers. This was before the advent of social media, of course. But it was good advice at that point. And so the editor said, readers usually look at the sports section first, then often the letters, weather, and cartoon strips. So Tad started to write letters to the editor. When Tad was preparing for this talk, I got the job of counting all those letters. He has them all filed away. And he's had 246 letters all published in the Lethbridge Herald since 2005. And Dawn was the editor, so give her the round of applause. But we couldn't believe it, right? I thought we have to count these. So that there you have it. Finally, Tad comes to his involvement with Nikka Yuko Garden. For 17 years, he's volunteered there in various ways. And this is rather ironic because, as Tad said at the beginning, he doesn't think of himself as primarily Japanese. He resents being pigeonholed in this way. He never, ever would have imagined doing this 30 or 40 years ago. But Nikka Yuko has come to feel like home. Perhaps that's not because it's not just, or perhaps that's because it's not just a Japanese garden, but rather a Canadian garden in a Japanese style. Its greatest strength is that it takes a traditional form and modifies it to work in a new locale. A truly authentic Japanese garden will die in the severity of a Canadian winter. And Tad would have withered too if he had remained fixed in one identity. The garden continues to evolve, and so too does Tad. In conclusion, Tad is a Canadian who migrated from Japan. He's been changed with each boundary he's crossed. He grew up in Japan, but part of him belongs to Africa, to Switzerland, to the Middle East, and certainly to Canada. And now he finds himself, we both find ourselves, in Blackfoot territory. He may not fit the standard mold of a Japanese Canadian because he doesn't share that traumatic history of that group in Canada during the World War II, though he certainly witnessed the devastation, the difficulties it wrought for people post-war. But parts of Tad's experience has helped him understand and learn from their stories. Japanese Canadians, like all other groups who have immigrated here, should not be pigeonholed by their hyphenated identity. And yet all Canadians must also acknowledge that part of our identity is that we are settlers who have crossed into First Nations and Métis territory. We benefit from their generosity, their forbearance, and indeed from their past losses, which we are now called upon to set right. Canada's just a small blip in the long history of Turtle Island. Albert Einstein said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge." Imagination invokes curiosity and creativity. It motivates art, religion, and science. Imagination leads people to work towards justice and more equitable futures. It fuels actions aimed at reconciliation. Imagination is the air beneath the wings of wild birds who lead us to explore new spaces. Tad has watched those who have soared before him. Sometimes he's flown with them, and other times he's remained stuck to the ground. He's grateful for all the people who have been part of his story around the world and in this place, Lethbridge, which he now calls home. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wrote, but she read well.
Good material.
And I just remember Dawn was the editor, managing editor when I started to write.
I'm glad you didn't write the book, because you wrote the letters, but I still kind of would read the book.
So, Gideon, thank you.
Yeah. I also read your letters with admiration, so thank you for sharing the source of your courage and your compassion and your wisdom today. And I must say the teamwork between you and Muriel was seamless. That was something to behold. I think Tad is willing to take some questions. Would anybody, I'm sure there may be questions or comments. Chris.
Sorry, this might be a bit of a strange question, but in your speech you demonstrated how this pigeonholing behavior can be damaging to other people, but what do you think could potentially be the self-damaging effects of that pigeonholing behavior?
Damage that would be result of self-imaging, pigeonholing. Could you repeat that again?
If people are performing the behavior that's pigeonholing, and you've demonstrated the damage that that can have on the people who are victimized by that approach, do you think there's any potential damage that those people inflict on themselves by pigeonholing others?
Definitely, yes. We think that's the only way we can live. I mean, restricting yourself. In my case, psychologically, the shame I felt by being looked at by young American 17-year-old soldiers, those dirty Japs, that really damaged me. It took time to recover my self-respect. And I'm glad I did hold on to self-respect. I don't know where it comes from. I think it's a sense of identity. It's very important. If you have that within yourself, you don't have to be damaged. You can laugh it off. You can laugh it off as a silly comment from ignorant people. Keep that respect. I can tell that to every street person who run into, hoping on the street. How did they damage to feel so humiliated? Don't get humiliated. Keep your self-respect. So if you want to destroy a person, starvation, poverty, you can survive. But if you lose your self-identity and pride in it, then you destroy yourself from within. Does that answer the question? I'm still thinking. I'm going to be 92 soon, but I'm still thinking.
Knut.
Tad, you helped bring Gershon Baskin to Lethbridge many years ago to speak at SACPA. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got to know him and what is going on with him now?
You mean that crazy Jew?
Yes.
Yes, I met him in 2003 in Jerusalem. He was running independent research group on the south end of Jerusalem, no, Bethlehem. And what I admire about him is he has no friend. Palestinians don't trust him because he's a Jew. And the Jewish right-wing people absolutely hate him because he tells the truth. That's why I decided I like that guy. And he needs to talk to get some fee to survive. And he cannot make a living in Israel. He loves both people, Palestinians and the Jews. He's a Jew himself. That's why I want to support him. Often people who live by the truth have a hard time surviving. Really difficult time. I know a lot of artists, Shannon, who have to have other jobs to survive because they're good artists. So we have to decide within our head that there's a difference between the purpose of your life and the art to make a living. It's two different things. And I'm a clergy, and a lot of Christians in Canada are just disappointed. We are at the end of the history. Because churches have no more money, no more people, there are few people sitting in the pews. They think that's the end of the history. That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I know a comment about one famous music teacher. A lot of people come to learn from him. And every time a student comes to be under his tutorage, first question he asks is, how do you make a living? If you want to be a really good musician, you have to know other way to make a living. There are two different things. And the clergy and the church people have to learn from artists. They're after beauty, they're after idealism. To make a living, learn to cook, work for the restaurant, and then you carry on your life as a true human being, as an artist. Look at any monk, true monk, who served people. I know a lot of monks, like Michael Lapsley, who got nearly killed in South Africa. He never had a job because nobody likes him because he tells the truth. So he remained a monk. And when he opened a letter and blew up this level, he lost his testicle and right hand. And when I went to visit him in the hospital, he said, "That's okay, Tad. I'm a monk. I don't need a testicle. I'm a left-handed anyway." I like that sense of vocation and how to make a living. You know that as a politicians and mayor, politicians don't necessarily make a living. If you truly believe in the welfare of people, right? Often you don't make a living. I know a lot of politicians. Don't allow me to talk too much.
Well, thank you for the questions, and I think Tad's around, so feel free to ask your questions, in the coming days and months as you see him. Thank you so much, Tad. Thank you, Muriel. So for the final part of the evening, I'd like to call up once again the Society President, Don Sugimoto, and the Energizer Bunny, Executive Director, Michelle Day Miles, who really has grown this garden into this amazing attraction that it is. So yes, they have some presentations that they will be making.
Thank you, Tad, for being the coolest wild bird to ever cross our paths. Seriously. And for the call to action for us to challenge our own pigeonholing and the biases we all carry. And, I think sometimes we dehumanize when we confuse prosperity with value. Thank you. And your contributions to the community are so wide. You've brought so much to Lethbridge, and we're so glad that the garden has been part of your legacy here. Tad was nominated by Knut Peterson. Thank you, Knuty. The pair have worked together on the Southern Alberta Council of Public Affairs since 2006. And in his nomination, Knut referred to Tad's wisdom and vast national and international knowledge and lived experience. And I think we've seen that tonight. Through SACPA, Tad's been both a speaker and an organizer, and he's really expanded community thinking through letters, through speaking, through just sharing conversation. And at the garden, Tad served on the board until just this spring. We miss you. And he's been a regular and very popular feature at the garden, and telling stories and bringing culture to life and connecting with people of all ages and all backgrounds. And that has been a treasure. You have been a treasure, and we've really loved your quiet, reflective nature and how thought-provoking your words always are. Seriously, you should still write the book. Thank you, Tad, for your commitment to the garden. We really do value all of the hours you gave. I know that you had a million other things you could have been doing. And please come forward to accept your lifetime honorary membership. It's okay. You're good. Thank you. We also want to honor another lifetime honorary member. Rick Williams has a working relationship with Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden that goes back decades. It should tell you something that Rick's nomination came from not one, but two fellow lifetime honorary members. So I guess it takes one to know one. Tosh Kaneshiro, Lyle Sakamoto, thank you for those nominations. Rick is a former City of Lethbridge Park superintendent whose job made him responsible for maintaining the garden's horticulture and structures. And he served in that role with huge pride. Since retiring from the city in 2005, Rick has been invaluable to the Society's board of directors, for his knowledge of the garden, its history, its design, its plant life. He is an expert in all of those things, and it's been incredible to work with you. He's maintained a connection to Dr. Masami Sugimoto, the garden's landscape architect, and he has truly worked to honor that vision. As Lyle said in his letter of support, Rick's work nurturing and preserving the garden spans generations, and Lyle is the second generation at Westbridge Construction leadership to work with Rick on garden projects. So that tells you something. He's like the godfather or something. Rick had served as the board treasurer. He's looked after the garden's casino work for years. He'd love to see you at the casino on Friday and Saturday. Bring your wallets. And thank you, Rick, for your unwavering dedication, tireless work. It's been amazing to watch you work. To nurture Nikka Yuko. Would you please come forward? Oh, Lyle? Lyle and Tosh, can we have you come for a photo?
You guys have put up with them longer than I have.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there's my troublemakers. There we go.
Yes, you are.
And we have two other special employees that I would, and the society would like to recognize. We were gonna do a special staff recognition and then COVID hit. And it turned out to be just kind of a really unfortunate situation, and we did something just really short and sweet at the end of the season, but it didn't sit right. And we wanted to acknowledge two employees that have been with the garden for years and years and years. And the first employee, a lot of you will know in this room, her name is Mana Yoshimoto from Kobe, Japan. Mana has been by my side from my day one. I can't imagine how Mana felt walking into an office March 2015 to say, here's your new boss. And I'm like, hello, good luck. Mana has been my rock. One of the things that I really admire about Mana is that Mana has not only helped me understand and get to know the Japanese culture in such a beautiful way, a very respectful way. It's nice to see Mana also grow here as a person of Japanese and from Japan into this Canadian culture. So one of the things that I admire is Mana watched me grow, and I get to watch her grow, and that is part of the reason why the garden has grown, because it's reflected Mana's growth. So, and I have to say, there is an urban legend of the garden called the Heartstone. Chris, the Heartstone was never a design intent of the garden, but it's become a staff urban legend, and when the school tours go through, they say, jump on the heart rock 3 times and you'll fall in love, and But that urban legend of the staff created throughout the years has brought the heart of the friendship and love to the garden. And it's the staff that have created that. And so I'd like to present, along with the board, a heart-shaped stone for being part of that heart for 11 years at Nikka Yuko Japanese Garden. So come up, man. And the other employee that we would love to recognize, Mr. Hatton. He has been with the Garden for 13 seasons out of the 14 years. Mr. Hatton is not somebody simply that, touches upon a hobby or a culture or a craft. Mr. Hatton dives in and he embraces and just embodies everything that he does in his life, including you can feel that love that Chris Hatton is. If you've ever taken a tour with Chris Hatton, he knows every single crook and cranny, sound, texture, design element. He's met all the founding members. He has been a big part of the garden, supporting the team and the programming. And not once has the garden evolved, has Chris ever said, why are we doing this? He has seen the journey of the garden and has embraced it and worked with us to make the garden what it is. My heart is breaking a little bit because I know I'm going to lose Mr. Hatton. This will be his last season. He's moving up to Edmonton with his lovely wife, Salia. So it's gonna be a little bit of a little gap because most of my staff, it's their first job. They come in, they fly in, they go out. And Mr. Hatton has been that consistent at the garden. And because he's been there and helped with the ship, that we're able to grow and create new ideas. And I am going to miss you tremendously, Mr. Hatton. So I'd like to present you a piece of our garden heart for you to take with you to Edmonton. But your family's here. You're gonna come visit? The garden is Hotel California. You can check in. But you never check out. And just to finish off the night with Dawn, we are always looking for garden supporters to donate to our organization because it does go towards programming, it goes to help our volunteers, it goes to help other organizations in our community such as taiko associations, Minyo dancers, the Nikkei Cultural Society. If you can't donate through that type of way, there's other ways of your time and programming. And believe it or not, it was not Michelle or her team that brought in sumo, it was Muriel and Tad that brought in sumo. So we love to have any support of the garden that we can. Our 8th annual Winter Light Festival will kick off on November 29th. So yes, local favorite. And I just need to say, since the Bunka Center has been opened, at the end of, I believe, August, our stat is we had over 100,000 people to the garden this year already. We almost are beating that record of 70,000 in the garden when you opened up in 1967. So we are on our way of making sure that we are the destination of Southern Alberta. And again, I think from Dawn and I, we want to thank all of our sponsors, all of the love and support that we've gotten over the last years, and just hold on because that garden is going to continue to grow with all of us. So thank you.